Today's sermon is about two things primarily. It's about identity and vocation, about who you really are and what you were born to do. Now, some other things might creep into the sermon along the way, but I wanted to be clear from the outset that that's what we're talking about, because we tend to talk about these things from the outset. We ask little children, what do you want to be when you grow up? Notice that we don't ask them what they want to do, we ask them what they want to be, as if what you do and who you are were the same thing. Now, that's not so bad if you're the lady who saves lives by doing brain surgery. You probably don't mind being known as a neurosurgeon. But if you are the guy who empties other people's garbage cans, do you really want to be known as the garbage man? And here's something I've learned through the years, that when you ask people what they do, they might tell you they sell toner cartridges for photocopiers. But when you ask them what they always wanted to be when they grew up, it is hardly ever that. They wanted to be firemen, astronauts, Indian chiefs, and instead ended up selling toner cartridges or installing fiber optic cable or managing mutual funds. And if you ask them how it happened, they shrug their shoulders and say, one thing led to another. It's not like they set out to do what they do. It's just that one small concession after another whittled those childhood dreams down to a more reasonable size, a more realistic career path. There aren't all that many job openings for Indian chiefs. Now, it probably wasn't like that for Peter and Andrew, James and John. I'm guessing that career options in a place like Capernaum were fairly limited. And no matter what they may have dreamed of doing as children, it didn't surprise anyone that James and John, for instance, followed their father into the family business, or that Peter and Andrew ended up doing what so many of the young men in that town did, making their living from the sea. I saw that happen in some of the places where I grew up. Lots of the boys in my elementary school classes had big dreams for themselves. But in Boone County, West Virginia, it didn't surprise us that many of them ended up working in the coal mines. That's where the jobs were. In Galilee, in the seaside town of Capernaum, fishing was where most of the jobs were. And that's probably how Peter and Andrew, James and John ended up as fishermen. The name says it all, doesn't it? In the same way a garbage man spends his days dumping other people's garbage into the back of a truck, a commercial fisherman spends his days, his good days that is, up to his elbows in fish. He throws those nets out into the water and hopes that when he brings them back in, they will be straining under the weight of a big catch. He dumps the fish into the bottom of the boat where they wriggle and thump up against the gunnels until he can get them sorted out, throwing the little ones back and the big ones into a bin. And when he gets back to shore, he's got to clean them and gut them and get them ready for sale. Don't you think that when he lies down at night, his back is aching? Don't you think he's always got scales stuck to his clothes and that his hands always smell like fish? He probably doesn't think about it every day, but when he does, he probably thinks that if someone came along and offered him another job, he would jump at the chance. And so we come to our gospel text for today, where Jesus is walking along the shore of the Sea of Galilee, inviting 4 fishermen to consider a different vocation. Matthew tells us that after John the Baptist was arrested, Jesus went back to Galilee. But instead of returning to Nazareth, he settled in Capernaum and made his home there. He may have had practical reasons for doing so. Capernaum was on the Via Maris, the way of the sea, the principal trade route between Asia and Africa. In a very real sense, it was the crossroads of the ancient world. And if you wanted to start a new ministry, you couldn't have found a better place. Maybe Jesus settled there for the same reason you would open a retail outlet near a busy intersection. Location, location, location. But that's not the way Matthew understands it. Matthew says this was to fulfill the prophecy from Isaiah about Galilee of the Gentiles, the land of Zebulun and Naphtali, so that the people who walked in darkness might see a great light. And the great light he was talking about was Jesus. He says that from that time Jesus began to proclaim, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven has come near." He began to proclaim, Matthew says, as if it were something that went on for a while. I can picture Jesus teaching in the marketplace, preaching in the synagogue when they would let him, telling parables to anyone who would listen, until little by little the people of Capernaum began to catch a glimpse of this coming kingdom. When God is in charge, things are going to be different, Jesus might say. When the kingdom comes, the lost will be found, the last will be first, and the least will be great. And for those who heard him, the least and last and lost of Galilee, it sounded like very good news indeed. One by one, those people who walked in darkness saw the light that he was, and one by one they began to repent of their sins and turn to the Lord, and the kingdom of heaven came a little nearer every day. In fact, it's not hard to imagine that the more Jesus preached, the more people crowded around him, hungry to hear more, until it became clear to him that he needed some help. Maybe that's when he went down to the seashore, where he saw Peter and Andrew washing out their nets in the shallows. He might have just stood there until they felt his eyes on them, until they looked up and saw the one they had been hearing for the last few weeks. He might have waited until they gulped and waited for whatever he wanted to say to them. When he spoke, it was simpler and more direct than they could have imagined. "Come, follow me, and I will send you out to fish for people," he said. And in that moment, he offered them a whole new vocation. But he also created a crisis. Crisis, from the Greek word meaning to judge or decide. Crisis, from the pressure of having to make a decision right now. There may have been times when Peter didn't care for his job, but it was honest work, and it kept his family fed. There's nothing wrong with that, nothing at all. Someone once reminded me that if it wasn't for the honorable work that garbage men do, all of us would be in a heap of trouble. But Peter may have been tempted to follow this stranger named Jesus anyway, to set off to who knows where in search of spiritual adventure. But where was he going? And how long would he be gone? And who would take care of Peter's family while he was away? Do you see how either answer could be the right one? How either answer could be the wrong one? But there wasn't time to think it through clearly. Jesus was standing there waiting. The crisis was on. In the end, a yes came to Peter with such force he had to drop his nets just to steady himself. Had to take a few stumbling steps forward, and by then it was too late. He was on his way. Immediately, as Matthew puts it, they left their nets and followed him. You could get the idea that that's what we're all supposed to do. That when Jesus calls us, we are supposed to drop everything and follow him. Is that true? Do you have to give up your job as a brain surgeon or a garbage man or the person who sells toner cartridges for the photocopier so that you can go into what we sometimes call full-time Christian vocation? I don't think so. And I'll tell you why. It's because of something that happened to me in the summer of 1978. That was the summer between my sophomore and junior years in college. The summer I was supposed to decide what my major would be. I'd been putting it off as long as possible, taking all the required courses and squandering my electives on things like drama, printing, filmmaking, and photography. But at the beginning of my junior year, I had to declare a major. And so there in the summer just before, I was trying to decide what that major would be. For some reason, I had been dreaming about a Mercedes-Benz sedan and wondering how I would ever get one. I think it was because of this guy I knew in college named Doug, who used to wear an ounce of pure gold around his neck on a chain and drive a blue Mercedes sedan. I knew he was only doing it to impress the girls, but it seemed to be working. and I wondered what it would take to get some of the things he had. His father was a doctor, and the Mercedes belonged to him. My father was a Presbyterian minister working among the poor in West Virginia. He had taken what amounted to a vow of poverty when he accepted that call, and so we never had much money. Maybe that was why I began to think that when I was on my own, things would be different. Maybe that was why I began to think about declaring a pre-med major. We lived in an old white farmhouse perched up on a hill overlooking the railroad tracks. My brothers and I used to sleep on the upstairs front porch in the summers, dragging our mattresses out there so we could hear the chirp of the crickets and the deep croak of the bullfrogs. After we had talked ourselves out each night, and just before I fell asleep, I would pray, God, what do you want me to be? And when I woke up in the morning, I would pray the same prayer. God, what do you want me to be? As the summer wore on, those prayers became more urgent. I had this idea that declaring my major would determine my future, that I stood at a point from which the full trajectory of my life would arc out in one direction or another. For that reason, I wanted to be sure that the direction I chose was the right one. That's why I was asking God in the first place. But by the end of the summer, I was tired of asking. I needed an answer soon. I woke up one morning and demanded, God, what do you want me to be? And the answer came back as clearly as if someone had spoken it aloud. Be a Christian. What? Be a Christian. And that was it. I lay there for a long time afterward, wondering if I had dreamed up the answer to my own question. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. As long as I loved and served Christ, I could be anything I wanted to be. I breathed a sigh of relief and decided then and there that when I got back to college, I would declare a pre-med major. Barbara Brown Taylor tells a story that is almost identical, and for that reason wonderfully confirming. In her book, The Preaching Life, she confesses that she struggled with her sense of call for years. One midnight, she writes, I asked God to tell me as plainly as possible what I was supposed to do. Anything that pleases you. That is the answer that came into my sleepy head. What? I said, waking up. What kind of an answer is that? Do anything that pleases you, the voice in my head said again, and belong to me. That simplified things considerably, Taylor writes. I could pump gas in Idaho or dig latrines in Pago Pago as far as God was concerned, as long as I remembered whose I was. In the silence that followed, she decided it would please her very much to be a priest. And for the next 2 decades, that's the career path she pursued. My career as a pre-med major, on the other hand, lasted exactly 1 semester. I was taking calculus, microbiology, organic chemistry, and hating all of it. If this is what you have to do to be a doctor, I thought, then I don't want to be one. I dropped out of school, transferred to another college, switched to an art major, graduated, got married, and for a while worked as a graphic designer. But then I took a part-time job as a youth minister, began to assist in leading worship, and one day in the spring of 1984, some well-meaning person at church asked if I had ever thought about becoming a pastor. Suddenly there I was again. I began to pray those same fervent prayers, lying in bed at night, hoping to see a scroll unrolled from the ceiling with a message from God just for me. I searched the scriptures, wrote in my journal, talked to anyone who would listen. But finally, I remembered the lesson I had learned in the summer of 1978. God had called me to be a Christian, and I had said yes. As far as God was concerned then, I was free to do whatever I pleased. And I decided it would please me very much to enter the ministry. 30 years later, I'm still here. And I still don't have that Mercedes. William Willimon says, the question of our vocation is settled at our baptism. When we say yes to Christ, we answer the most important call that will ever come our way, the call to follow Jesus, to be His disciple, to take our part in bringing in that wonderful kingdom He was always talking about. Even more important than what we do, then, is who we are. Be a Christian, that voice said to me. And then, do whatever you want.